Dr. Gilmore was a very odd client. He always acted as if people were after him, a shadowy, unknowable thing. And for an odd, inexplicable reason, he was obsessed with the collection of religious artifacts. Recently, he'd sent us on a wild goose chase for the bones of a saint that also happened to be a serpent head. He was that sort of weird. Still, he paid well, and even if he canceled at the last minute, the artifacts he wanted us to procure fetched a high price elsewhere. I was not surprised when he ended up dead in an alley, torn to shreds, mauled by wild dogs, and dressed in religious robes we'd sold to him for a few $1,000s. His death did not concern me, but the museum chock full of expensive, dangerous artifacts he left behind greatly did. My name is Quentin Loreno. I'm somewhat of a middleman in the criminal underworld. I mediate the crime families, I arrange diplomatic marriages, I keep things civil, but above all I host auctions. Art is a tastefully wonderful medium of laundering money and hosting both underworld and legal auctions is kind of my speciality, and I also recover and sell cursed artifacts. My plan was in essence to raid Dr. Gilmore's museum, all the artifacts we'd sold back in our hands, and all the money we'd earned selling them to Gilmore we could sell to a million other collectors. Gilmore was the type not to have any security, fearing the ever-elusive they would infiltrate the office, so it wouldn't be a complex heist, and my team was built for it. Steven, my assistant and magician, could dispel any enchanted security forces. My psychic, Aster, could sense what artifacts had the most value, and Matt had a history of hunting and killing monsters, and I had both the files and the wit to keep us together. You know, my assistant, Steven began, rubbing his thick, white-haired head, if we raid Gilmore's, the company is going to be after us. I hadn't factored in the company. We engaged in the criminal art of passing and selling illegal, cursed artifacts. The company was the polar opposite. Their world government-funded agency recovered artifacts and locked them in warehouses across the globe. And if they thought the operations of the House of Loreno had gotten out of hand, they wouldn't think twice about crushing us. One would wonder why the company hadn't already crushed us. They were in the business of recovering dangerous artifacts for equally deadly clients. We had a deal, me and them. Well, one or two of them. I would squeal on the ones that seemed too unhinged, the ones looking with the intent of hurting others. They would get names, addresses, locations, and we were left well enough alone. It was an unspoken rule, a tacit code of the artifact underworld. One did not mess with the company, and they did not mess with you. Correction, I pointed out, they might be after us. I reminded the team of the deal we had made. Think of it, we sold over 300 artifacts to Gilmore. If we resell those, our debt to the Stutsky crime families may be repaid. Matt rolled his eyes. How exactly are we going to recover 300 artifacts from the middle of nowhere before the company get there first? Asta raised a hand. We have the eternal backpack of Ali Rashenka. This was a relatively new item in our collection, but, as the name suggested, allowed us to store virtually an infinite amount of anything within it. Me and Steven haven't finished emptying it, Matt countered. We're quite certain there's a guy trapped in there. Steven nodded along, agreeing. We're quite certain it's Ali himself. This was new information. Somehow, he survived. Theoretically, it will work, right? I inquired, discussing the backpack. The protective spells on everything we sold him should keep us safe. Well, yes, Steven affirmed. Nothing we sold him was above a class 3. Most of them were dormant, too, or augmentation tools. Then what are we waiting for? I discussed. Empty the backpack, and let's hit the road. And if the company decides to confront us about it, Aster finalized. I thought about it for a moment, and then another. We leave no evidence. We were there, and if they do find out, I paused and thought about it. We'll hand the artifacts over to them. Aster and the team mulled over that for a second more and found it acceptable. I answered some unrelated questions regarding another client, and we dismissed. Matt and Steven went back to removing the rest of the backpack's contents. I checked on them now, and then, finding the room filled with bits and bobs, ancient scrolls, pearl jewelry, even a cat, and of course, Ali Rashenka himself. We locked him into one of our many storage rooms with food, a blanket, and water. This would be temporary. We would deal with him later. I checked in on the psychic. Next, asked her. I found them reaching into the ether, surrounded by a selection of docile but powerful artifacts. On honing my skills, she explained. She picked up an old, dusty book from the floor. I found this in the room we found in the basement. I read it. Everett's Guide to Successful Canaries. Everett was my father's canary psychic. I murmured, "What's in this book?" "More advanced skills." Aster shrugged. "I don't know. I've only just started. Check back with you later." I journeyed off into another selection of rooms. I checked my schedules, dotted the I's, and crossed the T's of new imports for the auction house. Restless, that was it. I wanted to be in the museum and recovering our artifacts. Our debts to a very relentless and terrifying crime family would soon hopefully be paid off. "It's done," Matt cheered, tossing over the old tattered backpack. "No more things inside." "We're mostly sure of that," Stephen added. "There might be a cat in there still." I looked inside. I only saw an open void of nothing. I decided it was good enough. I told them to get prepared while I fetched Aster. Within the next few moments we were ready. Gilmore, much to our luck, lived an hour's drive away, so we wouldn't arrive too late. Earlier was best, especially when the threat of Company 7 was on our coattails. We were geared up to the max. Gilmore was paranoid. He didn't have living guards, but from the 2 times we'd actually delivered something to his museum, he did have undead guards. And the news of his death had rocked the criminal underworld. Other looters were bound to be on their way. "So," Matt began, a smile on his face, the kind he often had when he was about to tell a joke. "If you die and come back, you're undead." "So," Aster said. He laughed to himself. "So if you kill an undead, aren't you re-dead?" Aster shook her head and replied, "No, I think that's just dead." "But then you're dead twice, Sue. What if they resurrect you again? Does that make you?" He paused, thinking intently, goofy grin on his face. "Unre-dead." "No, that's not right. Unundead. Re-undead," I managed, joining in. "We'll all be dead if you don't shut up." Stephen silenced, stopping the car behind a patch of green. We were deep in the countryside now, near the large, expansive mansion Gilmore had called his museum. Asta reached into the ether, leaning forward, eyes growing brighter. She focused, tensing, and as I steadied her, I noted how cold she was. "He still has most of our stuff." She searched deeper, about a dozen undead rawheads, pale skins, Nasgardy, a keen beast more. I remembered seeing a small menagerie of creatures inside. "Can you tell if he still has that chimera?" Aster nodded. We were ready. "All right, let's go." Rifle in one hand, knife in the other, I lead the group across the brush, climbing over the small fence, careful not to make any noises. The sun shone brightly above us. I remembered we were in broad daylight, and we would look equal parts stupid and concerning if anyone saw us. But then again, Gilmore was so paranoid the place was in the middle of nowhere. We found ourselves at the entrance. I checked the handle. It's locked. The team looked at me in annoyance. "Well, I don't want to break the door." Stephen muttered something, and the locks clickled, and the door slipped open. "Whoa, Stephen's always correct." "Is it me?" Matt began. "Or is the inside bigger than the outside?" "I do believe so," Aster agreed, although unsurprised I didn't catch that. In front of us was a ballroom, twin doors only revealing a sliver. To the right wing of the house were acres of shelves and ancient books. To the left was a more open area, with signs placed in front of objects and unfathomable things in cages. Stephen headed right, inspecting a book. "Dear God, it's the tome of Cubash Sisa." We stared at him, only he was familiar with the book. "You must have heard of Cubash Sisa." "Are we supposed to?" Aster puzzled. I shook my head. We went on, heading left while Stephen oohed and awed at the spellbooks, taking the ones he found interesting to his little book bag. He would join us later. Stephen could handle himself. As for us, we followed Aster's commands. She sensed which looked and felt expensive, and I dumped them into the eternal bag, and with protective container and all. Matt, for his part, kept watch. He was on guard, which also meant he started to crack really unfunny jokes. "Hey guys, why did the vampire refuse to drink tomato soup?" He answered himself, despite neither of us reacting. "Because he didn't like imitation." "Get it? Like an imitation crab." I studied a large pair of axes the labels claimed to have been responsible for an entire family's death. Asked her, how does this look? Well, it isn't cursed or anything. But, asked her, amongst being able to sense the bizarre, also had a knack for both history and economical appreciation. I think the Maxfields will buy it for a fair price. And it goes, and I swept them off and into the bag. What's a vampire's favorite fruit? Matt continued, pointing his gun around every corner. A nectarine. I think that, among the many other jokes, broke Aster. Oh my god, Matt, shut up. Her voice echoed throughout the museum, and for a second, all was quiet. But for her echo, oh, I elbowed Matt. He sighed and shut up. Something rustled up ahead, brushing against the shelves and stores. Up ahead, Matt murmured, training his weapon. He set the silencer and aimed. A shambling, gluttonous thing shambled into view. A rotten smell filled me, and a glance at the thing sent my fear into play. It was slug-like, yet looked like decaying human flesh. A scrambling of eyes blinked at us, and several mouths snarled. It's a flesh weave, Matt murmured, training his sights. Always wondered when I'd get to kill one. The fattened creature made a fleshy, moist noise, and hands erupted from inside it, hands that reached outwards toward us. Matt fired quickly at the being, bursts obliterating hands, and creature's holes that blood and pus erupted from. A severed arm wrapped itself around my leg. I plunged my knife into it. Aster concentrated herself, then placing her hands upon one of the detached limbs, burning it. Where'd you learn that? New book, she shrugged, fighting off more limbs. Great book. Stephen unlatched a cube from his belt and threw it into one of the creature's mouths. Have a snack. The bright light enveloped the beast, and suddenly we were covered in blood, flesh, and substances I dare not name. Did you hear that? Someone shouted, one neither Stephen nor the three of us. It sounded like gunfire, a hissing, higher voice snarled, and a snack. Do you think it's the company? A third voice wondered. Other looters were here. I was right, we weren't the only ones with the idea, and the footsteps were heading our way. I turned a shelf. My team followed and we hid. The three appeared, disgusted at the mess of flesh and blood. Two were human, a man and a woman dressed in light gear. The third was a serpent head, using its strength to carry an overflowing backpack on its back. It licked the air, but I hoped the dead would outstench us. I smell something. It snarled, loudly being echoed by the walls. Jesus, lizardman, keep it down. The man silenced. The serpent head stared sternly at the man. I told you, Jeffrey, that is a slur. We are called Stetsky. Jeffrey sighed, clearly annoyed. If you find that a bit too challenging, you may call us serpent heads. The woman spoke. Don't insult the Stetsky, Jeff. You know better. Fine. Eve, the man stopped. Over there. My skin froze. Fear leapt in my throat. Had he seen us? There was a grunt nearby and a deathly howl. I dared a closer peek. They were hiding from a pale skin. Quiet now. The creature sniffed the air and began to approach us. The suspense is killing me. The Stetsky snarled, rushing out and pouncing upon the confused, undead priest. The undead groaned in something like pain. Stupid pale skin. With a deafening crack, the serpent head twisted the undead's neck. The body fell gracefully to the floor, and the weight of the Stetsky caused a fleshy crunch. This is when a loud, wooden bang was heard throughout the mansion, and both we and the rival looters froze in place. There was a click of something being connected, then 3 warning shots into the air. This is the company, a woman announced, the voice echoing throughout. Any looter who does not leave in the next 30 seconds will be in violation of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 1776. The Stetsky swore. I heard boots on the ground and gunfire as they quickly exterminated the rest of Gilmore's undead guards. And it was also time for us to leave. The 30-second rule was never enforced. They would simply shoot us on sight. You guys, I whisper shouted, gathering the attention of the surprised trio. They met my eyes through the shelves. That's right, you with the Stetsky. What do you want? Jeffrey demanded. If we work together, we can get out of here, I offered. The trio thought about it a while and agreed. Where's Stephen? Matt reminded. He held up his radio. Stephen, meet us outside when you can. Stephen replied, you got it. I sized the trio up and came up with a plan. The Stetsky would use his agility, strength to distract the agents heading our way, hiding into the shadows, and avoiding capture. Asta would keep an open mind, creating, in her words, a map of every living thing in the mansion. The two would stick with us, and we'd move as a group. For the most part, it worked. The Stetsky jumped from shelf to shelf, outwitting company agents and pushing artifacts to the ground, releasing the protective sigils and unleashing viscous spirits. They fought, spraying salts, holy water, and bursts of silver bullets into the air. Up ahead, Asta warned, sensing, too. The Stetsky was busy. I acted on impulse, pushing his shelf into the two. We ran as it fell, escaping onto another hall, nearing the entrance, then stopping. Why'd we? Eve stopped when she saw what I did. Guarding the entrance were a dozen or so agents, 4 armed with turrets that sat cleanly on the floor. A woman with a dozen patches on her uniform sat in a chair, directing moves onto a tablet. Matt turned to me for advice. Don't hurt them, I ordered, but we need a way out. He unhooked a different cube from his belt and threw it, no hesitation. One of the perimeter agents picked up, confused. Cover your eyes. The cube exploded into brilliant light, blinding the company. We took the chance to run, passing the blinded agents, and out. They fired blindly, hearing us move, but through sheer luck we avoided them all, bursting forth from the building. And, put your hands where we can see them. 6 more in front of us, guns pointed at our heads. Ah well, it was a decent try. And then a shadow leapt above us, and the Stetsky ripped into the group, confusing and tearing them to shreds. So much for my non-violence plan. The group inside the building emerged, firing at us. We ran for cover, but we were slowly being surrounded at all sides. I heard in a voice in my head, run on the count of 3. It was Stevens. 1, 2, the wind picked up. 3, and then the grass rose into the air and became beasts of green and brown. Spirit wolves brought by an unseen Steven attacked the agents, who fired. They did not harm them, though. Steven was smart. I saw another car, the trio's. Looks like this, I waved. Saying goodbye is where we part. The Stetsky caught up from the chaos. Pleasure doing business with you. Even in the chaos, he handed me a card. That guy was dedicated. Steven, in the car, held the door open, and we practically jumped in. The company fired, bullets hitting an unseen shield. Drive, I yelled. Drive. Steven turned his attention to the getaway, shield falling. Bullet holes emerged on our side, but the enchanted metal saved our engine. They started to give chase, and as we hit the main road a black truck was on our tail. I made my way to the back of the van. Give me the backpack. Astor handed it to me. I opened the back doors of the van. You want your artifacts? I found a particularly potent crystal skull we'd sold to the client. Take them. I tossed the skull through the van, hitting the van and causing its thin protection shield to fail. A creature burst forth from the skull, one with far too many limbs and eyes. Terrified, the truck veered off the side of the road. Just as we reached a bridge, tumbling off into a river, the creature washed away. As it did, Matt cheered at our victory. Astor joined in, and so did me and Steven. 3 black cars appeared in the horizon, following us. Not today, Steven. Steven whispered something, and the bridge deconstructed, falling into wooden planks and falling into the river. The company cars stopped their tracks. We've outplayed them, Matt cheered. We outmaneuvered the company, but I didn't feel so cheery. Sure, we'd escaped with more than enough to cut our debt in half, but I wondered if we'd attracted a much larger, more powerful enemy. If decided to, the company would crush us in an instant. I could only hope they didn't see us. Sure, we didn't hurt them in any way, but the Stetsky had, and they had no way of identifying our 2 groups. We've broken a rule, I murmured, quietly, to myself. A tacit code had been broken. One did not simply attack the company. One was supposed to disappear out of sight, out of mind. But what was done was done. Tomorrow would be another day. Look too far from a success, my father had once said, and you'll find yourself ever worrying. Things were good. Celebration was in order.